Good evening and happy Thursday, everyone. Thank you for joining us for tonight's critical conversation. My name is Kenia Thompson and I am your host. And we're here to have another, hopefully, educating, incisive conversation to try to begin having conversations around topics that people may not want to always talk about, but should be talked about and is necessary to talk about. So tonight I have my guest, Mr. Dave Baldwin. Hello, Dave.
Hi, Kenya. Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
Of course. I'm so glad to have you. We've been, kind of circling around each other in different circles that we're part of, but we haven't yet really had intensive time to talk about this or much other things. So I'm happy to have you tonight. Tonight, we're going to be talking about something that I think impacts a lot of people, especially with small business numbers rising. But before we get into the topic, I want to make sure that everyone who's watching either shares or go ahead and comment that you're here. We just want to make sure that this space is fostering open communication, that you guys feel safe to ask questions, and Dave will certainly answer any questions that come across tonight. So, Dave, we're going to be talking about systems, right?
Yes.
Awesome.
I love
So
systems.
he loves systems. Perfect. So before we dig into that, tell everybody who you are, what you do, and why you do it just a little bit.
Sure. Yes. So my name's Dave Baldwin. My company is Baldwin Systems, and I am a business process consultant. I sometimes have been called a process architect. And what
Mm.
I do with businesses is I essentially work with the process flow. I essentially figure out how do we need to do things in a way that allows a company to scale. And I make the important qualifier that I think scaling a company is not simply about making more money, but scaling a company means creating more opportunity. And that's really the essence I see of what my life's mission and business efforts are all about.
Yeah. And that's really the foundation of what we're going to be talking about tonight, right? Building systems for businesses. And you said specifically that allow small companies to grow. And again,
Yes.
that doesn't mean making more money, but creating opportunity for other people.
Yes. Well, it
Right.
usually does mean making more money, but that's,
Well,
yeah,
but that's not the focus. Well,
exactly. Yeah,
maybe it is the focus. I don't know, but it's not what's driving the
exactly.
efforts,
Yes.
right? Okay.
Hmm.
Yes. So, and I think, when people think about systems, they don't really understand what systems are. So let's start off with you just kind of explaining what are systems and what does that look like in a business?
Sure. Yeah. So a system, one of the classic examples you can look at is companies like McDonald's and any franchise type of business. I mean, what allows them to grow to the size they grow to, whether you like any particular company or not,
Mm-hmm.
their approach to growth is systematic. And sometimes it's easy to understand what something is by looking at what happens when it's not there.
Yeah.
And for businesses that don't grow because they don't have systems in place, one of the things that I have observed for a long time is what happens is a business becomes personality driven, is the
Mm-hmm.
way I think of it. So it might be just that the owner does things in a particular way, or a couple of key employees do things in ways that are defined by their personalities. And unfortunately, personality is not something you can duplicate. If you get, what will happen a lot of times is a business hires somebody and they luck out, sometimes by their own admission. It's like, okay,
Mm-hmm.
I got this person with this rare set of combination of skills and talents, and they just knock it out of the park. And the problem is, I can't get another person like that.
Mm-hmm.
So as soon as I want to grow or scale, I can't, because everything that I'm doing is hinging on this one personality. So that's kind of what I mean when I say there's a personality driven business. But the antidote to having a business get stuck in that particular rut is that you get systematic as early as possible. So a system can involve, numbers to measure certain things. I'm a believer that everybody should have at least one number that they're accountable for in a business that measures, did your job get done or not. And then,
Mm-hmm.
anybody in a sales role, there's a number they're accountable for, right? There's
Right.
usually two or three, but there's something quantifiable. In a lot of businesses, and this isn't even just small businesses, larger businesses have people that are, if your job is a cost center, they call it, essentially it's you're a cost for the company, but you don't bring in any revenue.
Mm-hmm.
Then your job is more likely to be evaluated based on somebody's opinion without there being any number. And I believe that's a recipe for mediocrity when you
Mhm.
have a lot of people in an organization where somebody can basically just arbitrarily decide, I don't think you're doing that good of a job, so you're not, but there's no objective metric. And so those are a couple of the characteristics of a systematic approach. But I think the main thing to look at is replicability. Is if I
Right.
have a team of 10 people, could I start another team of 10 people in another city and be confident that they would do things close to the way the first 10 people did them? And if so, you are likely to have a system. If not, you probably don't.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, I think all of the elements that you said is key, right? But I think what happens is when people are creating businesses, they're excited about creating the business, and then money's low, right? And so you're just like, I'm just gonna do this. And my business partner always says, solopreneurship. Um, you do everything on your own. Like, you are the one that's making this machine run, and at some point you have to take a step back and like you said, put some automations and systems in place, because what happens when you can't, right? Things
Exactly.
fail. So I want to read some statistics that I found. um we know that COVID really changed the landscape of work and then of businesses. Some businesses failed because of COVID and not pivoting, but there really were a lot of businesses that opened up during COVID. So we're talking to a lot of business owners that are in their first year of business, right? So we had a 24% increase in the number of startups from 2019 to 2020. The numbers for 2021 aren't in yet, right? That was 3.5 million to 4.4 million businesses that are now existing or created during that time. Now, failure in business, because we know it happens, right? 20% of businesses fail within their first year. 30% of businesses fail in their second, and 50% fail within the subsequent 5 years. So, I've got some reasons why, but I would love to hear from you. What have you seen with the businesses that you've worked with? Maybe some of the things that you've seen is, and that's why you're in this work, and that's why you're impassioned to get business or systems in businesses. What are some things that you've seen as to the reason why some businesses fail so quickly within that first 5 years?
Yeah, it's really, and one thing that's interesting to notice. I've thought about this a lot with those particular statistics, is that
Mhm,
you have, of the 30% that have already closed their doors within the first 2 years, and then
mhm,
the 50 that don't make it to year five. There's 20% of the people, of the businesses, are the ones that fail during those two particular points. And while I think you can see issues at all different phases of the business life cycle, I've noticed there's a particular pattern that's easiest to spot during that phase, because
mhm.
a lot of the businesses that fail within the first year, frankly, should have just not started in the first place, because they
Mm,
just were not on a solid foundation.
right,
And I don't mean to discourage anybody that has an idea for a business, but I think a lot of times it's a matter of, you've got to be emotionally, financially, and logistically ready and have the right foundation under you. It's not saying you shouldn't do it, but it's
right.
maybe a matter of certain other things need to happen first before you're really ready
You
to.
start. Mhm,
But when the businesses get past, I think the tragedy I see is when somebody starts off where they really had the shot at succeeding, and they fail because they didn't do the right things soon enough in the process. And you probably won't be
mhm.
surprised to hear me say that a lot of it comes down to failure to implement a system soon enough as a business. But
Right.
I'll get a little more specific as it relates to the businesses that you brought up in your question.
Mhm,
I think what happens is you have companies that, there's the passion of one person who started. I mean, you're like, if you built something from the ground up by yourself, nobody's ever going to be as passionate about it as you are.
no,
That's one of the things that I think can be one of the factors that causes businesses to not make it past that 5 year mark.
right.
Because what will happen is, a business owner will start something up, they'll get it going, they'll just do what they got to do to keep it running, just through sheer determination and persistence. And they will at some point hit a brick wall, or see the brick wall coming. They'll be like,
Mhm.
okay, there comes a point where it doesn't matter how determined or persistent you are, you can't do it all by yourself.
Yeah.
And some people realize that sooner than others. And then the problem is, they'll recruit people and just kind of assume that everyone else is going to be can have the same passion for their business that they have, or that
Yeah.
everyone else will have the same skills that they have, same ability to execute that they have. And that mismatch of expectations tends to become what I've seen to be the biggest hurdle that has a small business just stay small. Because one of the things that'll happen is they'll just churn through people. And a lot of times you'll have a business owner that goes through 4 or 5 people, and then it's like, well, why can't I get any good people? Or,
Right.
because they failed to recognize that, what they actually needed was a system. It was not a person. The other
Hmm.
thing I can see happening with a small business is you like that situation where somebody, you luck out and you get somebody who happens to be good enough to be able to do 4 different jobs. And that's fine in the beginning. If you get that person, that's great to kind of get through that initial hurdle. But what you've got to recognize is that sooner or later, as the business begins to scale, you're going to need 4 different people to do those 4 different jobs. It's
Hmm.
not, you can't have this one person system and expect you're going to be able to just run that way forever.
Yeah.
There's a lot you can do to kind of duct tape your way through the first 2 or 3 years. And it's fine to just do what you got to do in the short run, as long as you recognize that you've got to be putting certain measures in place to be moving away from that and maturing as a business, and actually getting enough structure in place that when you need to hire that fourth and fifth and sixth person,
Hmm.
you're not doing it by the seat of the pants.
Right.
Because basically after that 5th year and after a certain scale, you just can't get away with flying by the seat of the pants anymore like you can in the
Hmm.
earlier stages. And I think that's what a lot of businesses never get past.
Yeah. For those of you that are just joining us or just chiming in, we're talking about putting systems in place in your business that will eventually lead to success and longevity in your business. Dave has been kind of working in this space for a while now. He's seen some of the things that work and some of the things that don't work. And so, I think this is a really necessary conversation, especially again in the time and a space where so many businesses have been created in the past year. For those of you that didn't hear the statistics, there has been a 24% increase in startups just between the year of 2019 and 2020 when COVID hit, right? And so let's talk about, Dave, let's talk about ego and pride, right? A lot of the reasons why people fail to put systems in place, and correct me if I'm wrong, is because of just that ego, kind of going back to what you're saying of no one's going to love their business as much as the person who created it.
Yes.
And with that comes a pride, with that comes a level of ego of like, well, this is my baby. I'm just going to do it all. I know how it's supposed to happen. I know best. What are your thoughts around that?
You hit the nail right on the head. Those 2 words, ego and pride, are absolutely the biggest reason why people resist putting systems in place. And sometimes
Mhm,
it's conscious, sometimes it's unconscious,
mhm,
but there's always a degree of pride that comes with that initial hubris and that initial success. That be like, hey, look, I built this, I got this to where we are. I know what I'm doing. Like
yeah,
there's that kind of attitude, but
mhm,
and to some degree, you can't argue with success, but you also have to recognize that what got you to the place where you are is likely not going to be what gets you to the next place.
yeah,
And I've seen that that's one of the biggest factors that separates the wildly successful business owners from the ones that never go past mediocrity. Is they're humble.
mhm,
They're
mhm,
humble enough to say, hey, I don't know what I need to do here. Like I don't know what's next, and
yeah,
I need help to figure that out.
yeah,
And the willingness to take that feedback, the willingness to be corrected, the willingness to allow someone else to take the glory and the spotlight. I think those are huge things, and
mhm,
not everybody has that naturally. But I believe it can be cultivated, even by the most prideful person.
yeah.
If you recognize that in yourself and you want to do better, you can.
Yeah, and Miss Kimberly Winborn, hello. She said it best, right? Fear. Fear is a huge reason why people don't reach out. And I think humbling yourself and being able to say, you know what, I don't know, and I don't have all the answers, and to seek professionals, those experts that are in the spaces that they're in for a reason. We have a question from Jean. Can trying to expand your business too fast in the first few years be a reason why businesses fail?
I believe it absolutely can, but I won't say that it's strictly a matter of how fast or how slow you expand. I think it's a matter of how deliberate and how strategic the expansion is. I think that
Mhm.
sometimes a fast expansion is just a natural part of a life cycle, depending, because a lot of it is a factor of the market. But
Mhm.
I think the more common situation, which I think the listener is noticed, is asking about, is the situation where the business is just kind of reacting and thinking that any growth is good growth.
Right.
And it can especially be a disaster if you don't have a good handle on the financial numbers of your business. One of
Mhm.
the things that can happen is that growth is profitable in the beginning, but as you add more people and take on larger projects, you begin to lose control and lose visibility and not have as clear a sense of, where the money's coming from and where it's going.
Yeah.
And you can very quickly get upside down financially and have a really exciting 6 months or a couple of years, but then realize there's no money at some point. So yeah,
Yeah.
I think that absolutely can be an issue.
Yeah, there's no sustainability there. A few other reasons that I researched, I'll share that businesses fail. The first is not understanding their market, right? Not understanding what role they also play in the market and then what that market needs from them and how they satisfy those needs. Number two, failing to actually plan for your business, which is part of what we're talking about tonight, understanding what systems and processes need to be put in place, what can be automated, right? What are some things that are going to help streamline and make business easier and more productive? You've already said this, too little financing, right? Not enough money to make things work and happen. Bad location if you're a physical entity or business, or on bad online presence, and again, marketing. Fifth, not being fluid enough. Right. I think a lot of times business, or, we as business owners, we're so stuck in this idea and the vision and this plan that we created. But it goes back to the first one of not understanding our market and then not being fluid enough to go with that market. It's okay if your exact vision isn't what happens, right? As long as what you went into business for still happens and you still find satisfaction and pleasure in that. But I think people get so stuck to a plan, they don't allow room for deviation a bit. And then one of the reasons that they put here, which you've kind of already explained, is potentially expanding too quickly, right? And not being prepared for that expansion. So Dave, tell me, I've got a small business. I've told you a little bit about my business, right? I have a public speaking course, for example. Give me an example of what automating a system or putting a system in place for my public speaking course could look like.
Well, there's systems in a number of different areas of a business, but one of the first things I always look at is a financial system. So that starts
Mhm,
with something as basic as bookkeeping software, but not just the automated tool, because the automated tool is, the system I look at is the combination where the people work with the tools. So you've got to have a way to work with it. So I always recommend for every business owner, regardless of the type of business, and this for your business or anyone else's, on the financial side of things, have a system in place where you get in, you're looking at your numbers on a monthly basis and decide what number to watch to say, okay, am I on track or not with where I want to
mhm.
be in my business?
Right.
As a KPI or key performance indicator, I think that's the number one starting place of any kind of systems, because that's where you really are going to measure everything else from.
Mhm,
And I think also you can get into, on the operational side of things, the e-learning industry is moving towards more like from the most basic level. You've got recorded video for courses instead of live lectures, but then you've also got email sequences and buyer's journeys that you can take people through. But again, I would say it's not simply a matter of automation, but it's actually learning how to leverage automation so that the people can utilize you can get the best experience when people are interacting live. They're really making use of that time well,
yeah.
so that you're not burning live airtime doing something that could have been handled offline. So I think the education industry is a really interesting one now, because
Mhm,
just looking at all the pivots it's made over the last 20 years, with, just think about how we used to learn. It was drive somewhere in person and sit in a classroom and take notes. And
Mhm.
now all of that's done online, and there's
Yep.
there's a lot less live interaction. But the live interaction time that we do have is more about asking questions of the expert. And so I really think it's, if you're building a business, a public speaking business, it's really about leveraging those different types of tools. But so
Yeah.
could certainly go into a lot more detail, but that's kind of the foundation of it.
Yeah, no, I think that's great tips, and like you said, I gave my business as an example, but I think across the board, those are fundamental systems that should be in place for any business, right? If the goal is to be successful. Have you read the book E-Myths? I
I
forget
have,
the author.
yes,
Yes.
very
Okay.
good book.
Awesome. Great book. I didn't finish it all because I felt overwhelmed, honestly, but it's a book that talks about how to be a successful entrepreneur, essentially, how to run a successful business. And one of the parts that I remember in this book is when he talked about how a business owner went through every single role that he has ever done in his business, and he documented exactly what happens in that role. I found a lot of disconnect before when I've worked for others. And even when I try to get people to help me in my job, in my business, is people do the work and it's just second nature, but we don't know how to explain it to people when they come on board, right? You hire employees and they get frustrated because they're not performing the way they either want to or the way you want them to. And it's really because you have not given them the resources they need to be able to execute the role successfully. What would you say is like the most preferred or best practice in setting up different positions and roles, and how does that look in this process?
Well, I can tell you what I do for myself and what I generally recommend, what I have implemented for other people. I start with what I call a master process flow, and it is very similar to what Michael Gerber talks
Mm,
about in the E-Myth.
yeah,
And the basic idea is, I don't necessarily go with, like, he actually recommends creating an org chart and pretending like you've already got 25 people or something like that, except you're
yeah.
all 25 of them in the beginning.
Mhm.
But what I've actually, I use spreadsheets a lot. That's just kind of how my brain is wired. But I write out, like, when I say a master process flow, what I like about it is it's very scalable because it's very flexible in that, whether you're a business of one person or a business of 100 people, the idea is you actually start with one person at a time. And I have, mine has gradually evolved over the time that I've been slowly building it out. But a
Mhm.
master process flow does not tell someone how to do their job, but it's essentially says, here's what your job is. So it's
Mhm.
essentially a list of deadlines that, okay, here's what has to be done every month, here's what has to be done every week, here's what has to be done every day. And I make the clear distinction that, because if you want to create a job to teach, a tool to teach someone how to do their job, that's a different tool.
Mm.
I think it's a mistake if you try to combine the two together, because it just becomes a mess. And that's just
Mm.
from my earlier experiences trying to combine those two things together. I realized that I needed to separate it. But
Right.
but yeah, I mean, so master process flow, you can start out with one person's job, and if you really try to be as disciplined as possible about getting in the habit of, anytime you realize you're doing something that's not written down, you say, hey, that's another thing that needs to go in the master process flow. And if eventually it comes to be when you're going to realize that there's too many things on here for one person, and then I realize,
Mhm.
okay, I can separate this into another. I can break this in half and make it two different process flows for two people. But
Yeah.
the key and the point to how this becomes systematic is that if you start with a process flow based on a role, not based on a person, because then you've got a job that's defined by what gets done during that job, instead of defined by who takes the job, which is
Yeah.
what you have happen when there's a personality driven business.
Mhm. Yeah. Wow. I like how you said you separated the two, right? What the job does and then versus how you do it. And I didn't think about that because there are two different distinctions and approaches. And you're right. If it is a lot to try to understand, if you're just coming in, you're just acclimating to the business, understanding what the business does, and then trying to, perfect this role. What are some myths? Like people are like, I don't really need a system. Things are working fine. And what if things really are working fine? But what are some myths or misconceptions that people have that make them potentially not want to explore putting systems in place?
Well, I think there's fine can mean a lot of different things, but essentially, I think the myth is that you can just maintain where you are and things will continue to be fine. But
Hmm.
reality, as we've all seen, is you're either growing or you're dying in a
Yeah.
business.
Yeah.
And I've found that a lot of the businesses that become complacent, you can skirt by for a while, but
Yeah.
sooner or later, competition's going to enter the market. Market conditions are going to change, and if you don't have a deliberate strategy and decide where you want to go as a business, reality is you don't really have a business. You have a
Hmm.
job. You have a collection of jobs, and it can happen to companies of any size,
Yeah.
small, big, or medium.
Hmm.
And so I think really the myth about systems is that, as we kind of alluded to in the beginning, that scaling a company is just about making lots of money. And if that's really all it's about, I can understand why some people don't really want to do it, because it's like, well, I've got a nice house, I've got a good enough lifestyle.
Right.
I don't really need to make lots more money, and I don't want to work 80 hours a week when I'm not driven by money. But what I see is when you're not creating new opportunity, well, let's just say when you are creating new opportunity for people, there's a new kind of life that takes hold in a company. There's like an air of excitement,
Hmm.
there's just optimism, and what it's so unfortunate that when a business doesn't capitalize on its opportunity to grow, they're not thinking about the fact that there's opportunity you're denying people, because there's
Right.
people who could have actually had a future here if you had grown this bigger and made that space for people be big. But if you just, if an owner or a leadership team, they're just focusing on, making money and their own lifestyles and that kind of thing, then frankly, I think it is a bit selfish,
Hmm.
because if you can grow and you can create that opportunity, why wouldn't you do it?
Why wouldn't you?
So,
Yeah.
that's where what I think it's really about.
Yeah, I was looking on my phone. I was trying to find this article that I saw the other day, and I can't remember the business right now, but they were paying for all of their employees' college tuition. And I thought that was amazing. And then it led me to think about Amazon, right? So there's been, a lot of controversy about how much Jeff Bezos has made and how much people get paid. But Amazon has, obviously because we couldn't shop in person, but has skyrocketed, right? And when you think about the systems that happen and then the automated systems that happen in order for us to get our products like next day or 2 days later, like how what is the workings behind that? Like how much of, I don't know the question I'm trying to ask, but like what's the magnitude of something like an
Hmm.
Amazon?
Yeah, you have to think about economics from the standpoint of there's everybody, there's a lot of different actors involved in an economic situation in a macro or a micro scale. And I think when you mention about Amazon, there are, Amazon executives, there are Amazon frontline workers, there are Amazon customers, there are partners. And I think it is easy to look at, workers in a factory and think this isn't right, which I agree. I mean,
Mhm.
that there comes a point when the problems like that have to be addressed. But also
Right.
at the same time, I think where you're kind of going with this is those same workers can also benefit from lower prices and the availability of services as buyers
Mhm.
from the consumer standpoint. So you kind of,
Mhm.
I don't think there's a black and white answer. You have to look at the whole 360-degree picture. But another example is how in the industrial age, and then in the 100 years since then, we've had more and more automation that has initially that displaced human workers. That they're like, well, if factories automate, you're putting people out of a job. But
Yeah.
at the same time, you're also making goods and services available to people who couldn't afford those goods and services before,
Yeah.
and including those workers who don't have a job. But I would argue that also, the other factor that happens is you displace one job, but you actually can give rise to a whole nother industry, which now
Mhm.
creates jobs that didn't exist before. So
Mhm.
I think it can be short sighted to just look at one narrow set of an economic problem instead of looking at the whole big picture. So
Mhm.
it sounds like we're kind of speaking the same language on that one.
Yeah, I agree. Gene said he thinks the company I was trying to refer to is Kmart, and I really can't remember, but I thought it was just amazing that a company invested into their people that much, right? Because I go back to your statement. I mentioned that because I go back to your statement of it's not about the money, but it's about creating the opportunities for other people.
Hmm.
And I think one important thing, and this may be going into a slightly different direction, is to recognize that just because someone works for you for a time doesn't mean they will work for you forever, but to be able to provide them with opportunity to grow, to learn, and then to enrich the business landscape with whatever it is that they plan to do. I think that that's the ultimate goal, in my opinion. Amy said, sorry if this has been brought up already, but what is a layman's way of describing what a system is? Good question, Amy.
I'm not sure anyone's ever brought it up in exactly that way before. So yeah, I mean, I think if I take the jargon out of systems, there's you essentially I think of a system as a way that a system is when everybody is doing things the same way.
Hmm.
It's like one. Here's a great example of a system is sheet music. You could say everybody, all the kids should just improvise, and some kids will have great tunes and some kids won't. But sheet music is okay. Here's a song written on a piece of paper. So not everybody's going to play it perfectly. No one, not everyone's going to play it by the same way. But there's
Hmm.
now an objective standard as to
Hmm.
what song it is we're playing and what those notes are. So
Yeah.
that's kind of a maybe a simple practical example.
I think in addition to that is saying that maybe you said it, our goal or destination is the same, right? Our end results are the same. Um, yeah, I think that that would be a good way to describe that.
You could think of it also as just the way things are measured is consistent. So,
Hmm.
because it's just because a company has a system doesn't mean everybody's going to be perfectly in sync, but you'll know who's in sync and who's not.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. So tell me, if we've got someone watching, someone's like, I just don't know where to start. I am overwhelmed. I don't have much money. I'm really just starting a business, but I really want to start this because I want to do this. Where do we start?
So if you're starting a business, let's just say if somebody has their own business now and we're trying to figure out, okay, I like this concept of systems, but I have no real understanding of how to actually do that. First thing I always recommend is getting a financial system in place and start learning how to do basic accounting.
Hmm.
If you really hate it, then hire somebody to do it. But I think a lot of people, it's worth at least giving it a try, learning the basics of how to read a P&L statement, read a balance sheet, and set up a tool like QuickBooks. It's fairly inexpensive. There's even free accounting software out there if you haven't really used it before, and there's
Yeah,
plenty of video tutorials. But the big, like I said, it always goes back to a KPI, and what I always recommend, the
what's
first
a
thing you got to do.
KPI?
So a key performance indicator. Sorry, so it's a
That's
number
okay.
that measures your success in your business. So this, the first thing you've got to ask yourself if you own a business at any stage is how am I going to measure whether I hit my goal or not at the end of a month, and start just decide what number you're going to look at and start looking at it at least at a monthly basis, but I'd recommend on a weekly basis.
Hmm.
And it's you can start with cash flow. Are you cash flow positive or negative? Are you putting money away? How much are you paying yourself at the end of the month?
Yeah.
And just simple financial metrics like that. And you'll be amazed when you just start paying attention to the numbers, your thought process is going to change. You're going to start to notice that your priorities are changing. You're going to start to realize that you use your time more effectively. But that's the simplest place that I would recommend as a starting point.
Nice, nice. Amy came back with a comment to her question, and we know Amy is a word wizard, but she said, would you say that a system is an ecosystem of processes?
That is a way you could describe it. And I
Yeah.
would just add that there typically tends to be some type of architecture or structure in place. An ecosystem doesn't necessarily have any kind of structure in place. It could be, a pond with fungus growing on it is an ecosystem, but
Right.
I think a system is deliberate and exists by design, but definitely can grow an
Yeah.
ecosystem around it for sure because
Yeah.
there's an organic side to it as well.
Well, we definitely don't wanna be a pond with fungus on it, Dave. We don't wanna do that because we will be part of that 20% that fail in the first year, right? Yes. Well, Dave, I think you've given so much information around the importance of systems in a business and starting out. If people want to reach out to you, they've got some questions, they're like, "Dave, please help me." How do they do that?
So my website is dave-baldwin.com. So don't forget the hyphen. That's an essential part. dave-baldwin.com. And you can also email me that same domain name, dave@dave-baldwin.com.
Okay. I'm writing it in here. .com. Perfect. Awesome. Well, Dave, what are some last words that you want to share with those watching, that you want to leave them with?
So one of my favorite quotes I'll end with is from an author called Stephen Pressfield. Wrote a book called The War of Art. I definitely recommend that for anyone, especially creative business types. It does a great job merging creativity with business. But he said that Socrates demonstrated long ago that the truly free individual is free only to the extent of his own self mastery, and
Mm,
that those who will not govern themselves are doomed to find masters to govern over them.
mm, that's powerful. That is powerful. Thank you, Dave. Thank you so much for being here tonight. I appreciate your knowledge and your expertise and you sharing it with us, right? I think people don't realize how valuable it is when we have experts like you to just spend time and give us these golden nuggets so that we can succeed or at least just plant a seed of success, right? So thank you so much for being here tonight.
My pleasure.
Um,
Thank you, Kenya, for
yes,
having me.
of course, of course. Thank you guys for watching, for commenting, and for supporting always. You provide safe space for our guests to be honest, and to share their knowledge and educate a little bit and have conversations around topics that aren't talked about enough. So thank you very much. And speaking of a topic that's not talked about enough, next week we will be back again Thursday to talk about race in politics. I've got congressional candidate Barrett Hallman Leak that's going to be joining me, and we're going to talk about what it's like to be Black and Brown in politics. And she's in California. So this is going to be interesting. And I'm excited to have that conversation with her and to really just be honest and transparent with some of the things that she's faced and some of the experiences that she's had. So please join us next week for that. Until then, thanks for watching. I'll be here again next Thursday, same time, same place, same host. Dave, thank you so much.
Thank you,
Have a great
Kenya.
night. Have a great night, everybody. Bye.